Good day. The topic of lecture 9 is intersubjective pragmatic factors of text analysis. We already know that the cohesion of surface text and the underlying coherence of textual worlds are the most obvious standards of textuality. They represent text-centered notions that indicate how the component elements of the text fit together and make sense. Even so, cohesion and coherence of text cannot provide absolute borderlines between text and non-text in real communication. People can and do use texts which for various motives do not seem fully cohesive and coherent. Therefore, the attitudes of text users should be included among the standards, that's categories of textuality. In linguistic literature, different attitudes toward the text are discussed under the headings of intentionality and acceptability. A language configuration must be intended to be a text and accepted as such in order to be utilized in communicative interaction. The production and reception of text function as discourse actions relevant to some plan and goal. These attitudes involve some tolerance towards disturbances of cohesion and coherence as long as the purposeful nature of communication is upheld. In their book, An Introduction to Text Linguistics, Bogrand and Dressler introduce such user-centered notions as intentionality and acceptability, the former subsuming the intentions of text producers, the latter reflecting text receivers' attitudes in communication. And the most immediate sense of the term intentionality, the producer intends the language configuration under production to be a cohesive and coherent text in order to attain his or her goal. However, text users normally exercise tolerance towards product when certain conditions, notably in casual conversation, make it hard to uphold cohesion and coherence altogether. Some situations may place such limits on time and processing resources that this intention is not fully realized by the presentation. Linguists regard such cases as reduced coherence. Text users may become confused and inconsistent if the situation is in some way disorienting, as in this example borrowed from Lillian Hellman's play The Autumn Garden, in which one of the characters, Rose, introduces new topics of conversation by using pronouns, thus creating misunderstanding and confusion for her interlocutor. Here is this textual segment. I'll read it. Rose gets up from her chair. She finds silence uncomfortable and breaks it. Now, where is it? If I can't have it immediately after dinner, then just I about don't want it. Too bad it's Thursday. I'd rather go and see him than go to the party. Then she turns to Mrs. Ellis and says, I think it's what keeps you awake, Mrs. Ellis. I mean, a little is good for your heart, but, my goodness, the amount you have every night. Mrs. Ellis interrupts her pleasantly. Would you mind telling me what you are talking about, Mrs. Griggs? You said, if it was not for the party, you would go and see him, but you thought I drank too much on a Thursday? Coffee. I mean, you drink too much coffee. Then it's coffee you wish to go and see? Now, you're teasing. You know very well I mean Robert Taylor in that thing. Sometimes a text producer may deliberately impair coherence for special effect. For instance, in this passage from Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes is pretending to be deliriously ill as he tries to deceive Watson by appearing incoherent when he starts rambling about oysters. I'll read this passage. You will convey the very impression which is in your mind, a dying man and delirious man. Indeed, I cannot sing while the whole bed of the ocean is not one solid mass of oysters, so prolific the creatures seem. Oh, I'm wondering. This kind of intentionality, attaining goals through deception, is not widely dealt with in linguistic literature. The interdependence of cohesion and coherence with intentionality can lead to complicated situations. There are cases when coherence is intended but not accepted because the intellectual level and the social background of the participants are too diverse. Mark Twain provides an extreme illustration of communicative failure where Scotty, a minor gambler, is trying to converse with a young clergyman while playing cards. Here is this textual segment. I'll read it. Are you the dog that runs the gospel mill next door? Am I? Pardon me. I believe I don't understand. Are you the head clerk of the doxology that works next door? I'm the shepherd in charge of the flock whose fold is the next door. The which? The spiritual adviser of the little company whose sanctuary joins these premises. Scotty scratched his head, reflected a moment, and then said, You rather hold over me, pard. I reckon I can't call that hand. Empty and pass the buck. How? I beg your pardon. What did I understand you to say? Each uttered sentence here is intended to be coherent by itself, but the discourse is non-communicative much of the time, and neither participant can discover the coherence of the other's text because of the gap in their social and intellectual background. The clergyman has recently arrived from a theological seminary in the East and is naturally unused to the speech of the minor. The minor uses expressions from card games, such as, You rather hold over me, pard, in the meaning you are holding rather higher cards than I am, partner. Or, I can't call that hand, in the meaning that I can't ask you to reveal your cards. Or, empty and pass the buck, meaning that put up some money and move on to another player. The minor, on its own account, wants the clergyman to use less formal vocabulary. The clergyman uses biblical metaphorical phrase when he tries to explain his occupation to the minor, saying that I am the shepherd in charge of the flock whose fold is next door. This phrase brings about the misunderstanding between the communicants, which is signaled by the minor's counter question, What? However, the clergyman's explanation of his initial utterance by the phrase, the spiritual adviser of the little company whose sanctuary joins these premises, again abounds in high-flown formal words that leave the minor in confusion. Mark Twain's discourse here is of course playful exaggeration, and we must bear in mind that it forms part of a larger text whose coherence is beyond any doubt. Still, it illustrates typical regulating actions that follow upon breaks in coherence as a continuity of sense. In this example, both participants signal the lack of comprehension with the help of the counter questions which require explanations. In a wider sense of the term, intentionality designates all the ways in which text producers utilize text to pursue and fulfill their intentions. An extensive body of research has been devoted to intentions in various disciplines, such as sociology, psychology, philosophy, and artificial intelligence. The function of text is seen somewhat differently in these several fields. Sociologists would explore the use of text in speech exchange systems where participants interact and allot speaking terms. Psychologists would emphasize the text producer's intention to guide the consciousness of the hearer. Philosophers have argued that a text producer who means something by a text intends the utterance of the text to produce some effect in an audience by means of the recognition of this intention. Intellectual intelligence researchers are concerned with people's plans and goals in order to better analyze the meanings of words whose subtlety lies in their intentions rather than in their physical manifestations, and so forth. Linguistics has been most profoundly affected by the philosophical approach laboring over the question of how intentions are in fact correlated with the format and sense of utterances. A more general approach has been worked out by Paul Grice. He's introduced the principle of cooperation represented by a set of maxims, 4 in all, that the text producers should normally follow in conversation. These maxims are merely strategies and precepts and not rules as envisioned by Searle. We'll try to illustrate the maxims as quoted from Grice. The principle of cooperation is stated as: make your conversational contribution such as is required, at the state at which it occurs, by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. Cooperation would be clearly demanded in situations where someone is in need of some advice or assistance. The following dialogue between Alice the footman from Alice in the Wonderlands by Lewis Carroll shows violations of the principle of cooperation. I'll read this passage. "How am I to get in?" Alice repeated aloud. "I shall sit here," the footman remarked, "till tomorrow and the next day, perhaps." "How am I to get in?" asked Alice again, in a louder voice. "Are you to get in at all?" said the footman. "That's the first question." "I shall sit here," she said, "on and off for days and days." "But what am I to do?" said Alice. "Anything you like," said the footman, and began whistling. Here, Alice's intentions are blocked by the footman's refusal to accept her plan of getting in. Instead, he muses over his own rather goalless plans. We have already mentioned that the principle of cooperation is realized with the help of the maxims, that is, strategies that should be followed by the speaker. The first maxim, which is called the maxim of quantity, concerns the informative aspect of the discourse. It says, make your contribution as informative as is required, but not more informative than that. We already know from the previous lecture that being informative would involve giving someone new or unpredictable knowledge when occasion arises. The second maxim is the maxim of quality, which concerns truthfulness of the utterance. Do not say what you believe to be false, or that for which you lack adequate evidence. This standard is more rigorously applied to scientific texts than to conversation, but even in the latter, it is generally regarded as social obligation. Disregard for truthfulness may be motivated by the intention of concealing one's own actions, as is observed in Tom Sawyer's situation, in which he tries to escape punishment when he is caught red-handed stealing some gem from his aunt. Here is a dialogue between Tom and his aunt, Alfred. What were you doing in there? Nothing. Nothing? Look at your hands, and look at your mouth. What is that track? I don't know, aunt. Well, I know. It's jam, that's what it is. 40 times I have said, if you did not let that jam alone, I would skin you. The third maxim, the maxim of relation, is simply represented by the postulate, be relevant. Relevance could have at least two aspects. One, what kinds of knowledge are related to a given topic, and the other, what kinds of knowledge would be useful in attaining some goal. In Alice's dialogue with the footman, both aspects are violated by the latter's utterances, while in Holmes' speech to Watson, the remarks on oysters are irrelevant to the topic about which Watson is being instructed, but highly relevant to Holmes's goal of appearing delirious. The last maxim is the maxim of manner, which is represented by four postulates. Avoid obscurity of expression, avoid ambiguity, be brief, avoid unnecessary verbosity, and be orderly. Avoid obscurity of expression implies that here the potential obstacle to communication lies in the face of mapping already selected and organized content onto surface expression rather than in making the selection itself. However, a text producer might have motives for obscurity, such as the attempt to appear educated or to prevent a distribution of knowledge. For instance, the obscurity of expression in tax laws is apparently a big money saver for governments, as it is implied in this article borrowed from Financial Times. I'll read it. According to the president of the Federal Tax Council, approximately 90 laws and 100 regulations for taxes are often so complicated and incomprehensible that taxpayers certainly cannot recognize all the benefits for which they are eligible. Different from obscurity of expressions, ambiguity is connected with possible different interpretations of lingual units. In other words, although many natural language expressions could have different senses Under different conditions, ambiguity obtains only when it cannot be decided which sense is intended. Consequently, participants hasten to eliminate ambiguity by regulating action, usually by paraphrasing the content into a non-ambiguous format. Let's consider a dialogue between a railway official and a customer. A customer is asking, "When is the Windsor train?" "To Windsor?" "Yes, 3:15. In this discourse, the customer's opening question is ambiguous, since in this situation intentions to find out about trains either going to or coming from Windsor would be equally reasonable. The official at once reformulates the troublesome part of the question into a determinate format, thus eliminating ambiguity in the customer's utterance. Under normal conditions, participants would be motivated to remove occurring ambiguities as efficiently as possible, since the insistence on ambiguities would discourage communication. The third postulate of the maxim of manner is "be brief." While the maxim of quantity concerns how much you say, brevity concerns how much you take to say it. For instance, Constable Dogberry's speech quoted from Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing demonstrates the violation of brevity which is caused by 5 more restatements of the fact that the prisoners have committed false report. Here is this text, I'll read it. Dogberry is reporting. "Sir, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondarily, they are slanderers. 6, and lastly, they have bullied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things. And to conclude, they are lying knaves." Pedro interrupts him. "This learned constable is too cunning to be understood." The satirical effect of this passage rests on the failure of the constable to maintain the register of a legalistic text, confusing the numbers and moreover ending with a non-legal term, lying knaves. Not surprisingly, communication breaks down over this violation. The final part of the maxim of the manner is "be orderly." That is, present your materials in the order in which they are required. Normal ordering strategies make processing and storage easier, since the mind does not have to strain itself by searching for an unconventional organizational mode. Though the majority of human situations are not well scripted, a text will be plan-directed whenever its producer is trying to steer the situation towards some goal. Together with intentionality, Bogrand and Dressler introduced the notion of acceptability as the text receiver's attitude in communication. In the most immediate sense of the term, text receivers must accept a language configuration as a cohesive and coherent text capable of utilization. It involves readers' inferencing activities that illustrate how text receivers support coherence by making their own contributions to the sense of the text. Like intentionality, acceptability includes a tolerance range for such minor discontinuities or disturbances as illustrated in the above given examples, provided that the continuity can be restored by reasonable problem solving. If acceptability is restricted, communication can be diverted. It is accordingly taken as a signal of non-cooperation if a text receiver raises questions about acceptability when the text producer's intentionality is obviously in effect. Text producers often speculate on the receiver's attitude of acceptability and present texts that require important contributions in order to make sense. Let's consider the text. The Bell Telephone Company warns people, call us before you dig. You may not be able to afterwards. In this text, people left to infer that digging without asking might lead to cutting off a ground cable and hence to losing the wiring needed in order to call, or even to sustaining bodily injury. It is intriguing that this text is more effective than its full version given below, where everything is more explicit. I'll read this full version. The Bell Telephone Company warns people, call us before you dig. There might be an underground cable. If you break the cable, you won't have phone service, and you may get a severe electric shock. Then you won't be able to call us. Apparently, text receivers are readily persuaded by the content they must supply on their own. In this sense, the first version of the text is more informative than the second. The correspondences between intentionality and acceptability are exceedingly difficult and complex. Under stress or time pressure, people produce utterances which they might not feel disinclined to accept under normal circumstances. And conversely, they accept utterances from other people which they would be reluctant to produce. It has been demonstrated that people may not be aware of their own speaking style and be surprised to hear authentic recording. Also, people often go and repair their utterances when deemed unsatisfactory, even though their knowledge of the language has not changed at that moment. In a wider sense of the term, acceptability would subsume acceptance as the active willingness of the text receiver to participate in a discourse and share a goal. Acceptance is thus an action in its own right and entails entering into discourse interaction, with all attendant consequences, of course. Refusing acceptance is conventionally accomplished by explicit signals such as I'm too busy for talking just now, or I don't care to talk about it, and so on. Otherwise, participation in discourse would be assumed to imply acceptance. The acceptance of other people's goals may arise from many diverse motivations. Successful communication clearly demands the ability to detect or infer other participants' goals on the basis of what they say. By the same token, text producers must be able to anticipate the receiver's responses as supportive of or contrary to a plan. We can also see from the above analyzed examples how great a role is played by the context of communication with respect of intentionality and acceptability as the intersubjective pragmatic factors of text analysis. Thus, intentionality and acceptability represent intersubjective pragmatic standards of textuality involving both text producers and receivers' attitudes towards the text as their cooperative interaction in the discourse. That's all for this lecture. Thank you for attention.